The only thing they ever did was dream about returning to Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. And when I was a teenager, I thought, wait, all I need to do is get on an airplane and go. How can I not do that? How can I not fulfill all of their dreams? And so I wanted to do that, and I went there.
Hi, and welcome to this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint here on Bot Radio Network. It's my pleasure, friend, to have you stop by and join us as we welcome our guests today. And this is a special treat for us, all the way from Israel. Abraham Silver, he is an Israeli scholar in residence at the Memphis Jewish Community Center. Abraham, welcome to Memphis and welcome to Bot Radio Network.
Well, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Can I say shalom?
Of course you can say shalom.
Okay, shalom.
Thank you
I
so
understand
much.
that you are an amazing tour guide. You lecture at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and you have a passion as an educator. And that's one of the things we're looking forward to talking to you about today. You and your wife, Elisa, is that right?
Correct, Elisa.
Live in Tel Aviv with your two daughters, and their names are?
Shiri and Libby, and they're both 17 years old.
Twins?
Yeah.
How cool is that? So what is it like living with three women in the house?
Wow. Well, the current state of affairs is everything's about Taylor Swift, and I just don't have any idea what they're talking about.
You just smile and pay the bills, right?
That's right.
Smile and pay the bills. You've been here in Memphis for a few days, and you're really just sharing about life in Israel and some of the, present concerns that people have about Israel right there, just trying to give the perspective from an Israeli's viewpoint.
That's right. That's what we're doing here. We're kind of bringing Israel to Memphis. We're trying to explain a little bit both what's life is like and a little bit of the geopolitics of what's going on around us.
Abraham, what have you discovered as you first began your studies of the nuances and complexities of Israel in light of its past history and present development?
Well, I think that that Israel is this amazingly fascinating country. The most important thing I think I would say about life in Israel and understanding that is the United Nations does a scale of happiness in the world, and we are always within the top 10. This year, imagine we're going through, and we're the fifth happiest country in the world.
Isn't that amazing? What do you attribute that happiness to?
So I believe that the happiness is a couple of different things, but the main thing is that the Jewish people have returned to the land of Israel. We didn't return to fight wars, even though we're fighting wars. We returned to rebuild the Jewish national homeland. And there's no way that you can't look out in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem and not see, wow, there was nothing here, and look what is here now, and just not be proud and excited and happy about it. And I think that's coupled with the fact that we have a national purpose, that we understand why we're there, and that's self-fulfilling in terms of being happy.
When you mentioned return to Israel, you were in that category because you were born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. What do you remember most about your childhood? What were your parents like? And were you raised in a Orthodox Jewish home?
So I was raised in a traditional home, kind of Orthodox, semi-Orthodox traditional home. My parents were really great. In terms of Israel or just in terms of general?
Well, just in terms of you living in Brooklyn, life in Brooklyn, what did your dad do for a living?
My dad drove a subway.
Did he really?
And here's the thing about being a kid of a subway driver, which is whenever we were driving my mom mad, she'd give us tokens and say, go find your dad. And then when we would be standing on the platform and the train would come in, he'd get out and he'd go, what'd you do wrong? And we were like, how do you know we did anything wrong? And as an adult, I realized the only time we ever went was when we did something wrong.
Oh, I love that. Well, of the 5 boroughs in New York, Brooklyn has had the largest Jewish population. As you grew up in that time period, were there acts of anti-Semitism that you experienced while living there in Brooklyn?
No, the answer to that is really emphatically no. What was interesting about New York City was that everybody was something. Everybody was American, and everybody was something American. So it didn't matter if you were Puerto Rican American or Jewish American or Italian American. That was part of who you were, and everybody was just part of that. So the answer is no, absolutely not.
Do you mind giving us, as we start off, a historical perspective concerning the Arab-Israel conflict? I really don't believe, Abraham, that most Westerners understand the deep roots that are connected to this conflict.
Look, we belong to the land, right? We were in the land from the time of Abraham and Sarah. We were connected to the land, and for 2,000 years, from Abraham and Sarah to the destruction of the temple, we were part of the land. We were driven out by the Romans, and we kept it in our hearts. We kept Jerusalem in our hearts, as you probably know from the passages. If if I forget the old Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its cunning. We believed that we were going to return. Of course, in the meantime, the house didn't stay empty. And eventually the Arabs moved in the, 600s, 700s. And eventually when we came back to the land in the 1800s and we said, it's our turn, it's our time to return, there were also other people living there. And the conflict and the root of the conflict, very strongly to understand, is a conflict of two peoples living in the same house and trying to have to figure out how to share it.
Yeah.
The thing about that is that there are different epithets that are thrown around that are completely not true and not helpful. We're not colonialists. It's not apartheid. We just want a piece of land in our own homeland that we can return to and be able to express the culture and the civilization of the Jewish people.
Yes. What year did you move to Israel? And when you did, you lived in the Kibbutz-Ketura, is that right?
That's right. I moved to Israel in 1981. It makes me old. And I lived on a kibbutz. That's a socialist collective. Immediately when I moved to Israel, went into the army. I was in the paratroopers, stayed in a frontline combat unit until I was 50 years old, reserve duty, became a kibbutznik, which means living on a kibbutz, and I became a farmer. I very strongly wanted to farm the land.
And we're going to talk about that farm. I'm excited to do that. But before we go there, were you prepared for the living conditions or the living adjustments, rather, that you needed to make? I mean, how different was living in the kibbutz compared to the time you lived here in America? Brooklyn and the kibbutz, what's the difference?
So I like that question a lot because people would make fun of me a lot, which is I moved from New York City to a community that basically had 50 people in it.
Oh.
And people would be like, really? And what would be interesting is I go back to visit New York, and I would realize that there were more people on the subway car, much less the subway train. On the car that I was sitting in, there would be more people than all the people in my community together.
Oh, my. Abraham, this is the exciting part I want to talk to you about. The Kibbutz-Ketura is located in the Negev desert, where you spent 19 years as a date farmer. This is interesting. You were a history and philosophy major, and you became a date farmer.
That's absolutely right. I really wanted to farm the land. To be honest with you, first of all, I wanted to be in Israel. I felt that I was compelled to be in Israel. I felt the force of all of my ancestors. All of my ancestors, the only thing they ever did was dream about returning to Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. And when I was a teenager, I thought, wait, all I need to do is get on an airplane and go. How could I not do that? How could I not fulfill all of their dreams? And so I wanted to do that, and I went there. In terms of being a farmer, it was a little bit of I wanted to touch the land of Israel and hold the land of Israel and build the land of Israel. And it was a little bit of, as my friends went to move into office jobs, I thought that just wasn't for me. I needed to be in physical labor. And also, look, being a farmer, especially in the later 20th century, was looking at computer models of, how best to grow the crops. So I was physically working every day and sitting in front of a computer looking at computer models in the evening. So it was the best of both worlds, my mind and my body.
It was such an incredible experience when I went to Israel twice in 2018 on two different occasions. The agriculture, the food, the fresh food, it was just incredible there. Desert agriculture in Israel is one of the country's greatest successes, and something at which Israel leads the world in development. The Negev desert, which covers over 60% of the country, has actually shrunk in size over the past century as agricultural activity turned sand into green fields, which is really neat. What did you learn about date farming in the arid conditions?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, what did I learn about date farming? I got to the kibbutz at 10 o'clock at night, and before the sun had risen at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was assigned, because that's the way kibbutz works, to the date trees. I got there, and it was still 4:30 in the morning and dark, and someone said, here, let's go here, and climbed a tree, to which I looked up at him and said, seriously, I'm from Brooklyn. I've never climbed a tree in my life. So I learned everything, first of all. I learned everything. We needed to do water and water management, and that was certainly a big part of it. Salinity of water and quantity of water.
And that's what's amazing, Abraham. In the 1960s, an Israeli company, Negev, invented the modern drip irrigation technology. It's very fascinating. I saw it while we were there. Can you describe how it's used?
So it's actually been developed and redeveloped, but when we were there in 1981, like when we started with it, it's called drip irrigation, and what it does is that there's a a water pump that's pumping out just a certain amount of water. The drip itself is monitoring how much water it needs. So every drip or every drop actually matters to what the tree or the crop is going to need. So it's not sprinkling, it's not wasting any kind of water. It's just dripping enough water for the tree to be nourished. And I will say this, because this is the question that you asked, and that is today that's all done by computer. And in fact, it's even more highly sophisticated, which means that a computer will run, there's a computer chip in every drip, in the drip irrigation, and it will monitor what the trees need.
Doesn't the Tanakh speak of the deserts blooming?
Sure.
Isn't there references there?
For sure. And we made the desert bloom, and we're making the desert bloom. And it's certainly something to be proud of that, as you pointed out, we are the only place in the world that pushed the borders of the desert back in the 20th century. And within a greater picture of Israel, not my date trees, but Israel in the 20th century planted over 200 million trees to reforest the country. And over 100 million of them survived, creating forests that, by the way, today are recognized globally as a unique ecosystem, the planted forests of Israel.
It's interesting. I've discovered that there are some date trees that date back, many, many years.
So that's us. And I'm not sure if you know that that's us. But Kibbutz-Ketura, the place where I lived, was given date seeds from Masada and from the En-Gedi area. And they were asked if they could germinate them and grow them as the Judean date palm, the same palm that was during the time of Jesus. And we successfully did that.
Yeah, that's the one I heard. Yeah. I didn't know it was your kibbutz.
So that's my kibbutz, and and I have eaten those dates.
Have you really?
I have.
Oh my goodness. They're some of the best dates in Israel when you go. They were so delicious. Well, Abraham, and back in 2018, as I mentioned, I traveled to Israel and remember one particular evening to the Western Wall. The plaza was filled with excitement. It was filled with people celebrating a new installment of paratroopers into the IDF. There were Israeli flags waving, people were shouting, addresses were made by IDF and Israeli leadership. Now, as you mentioned, you served in the IDF as a paratrooper and served in the frontline combat unit as a reservist until retirement in 2003, serving in Lebanon. What was it like jumping out of a military plane into a hostile environment?
Okay, so two things. Number one, I was sworn into the wall as well.
Were you?
Yes.
This is an ongoing way they're installed.
The paratroopers are sworn in at the wall because the paratroopers captured the wall in the Six-Day War. And when you get sworn in, you get a gun and a Bible. You have to get the gun to be able to fight and the Bible to know what you're fighting for. So everyone gets a gun and a Bible. I promptly gave it to a friend of mine so I wouldn't ruin my Bible, so I still have it. And it's particularly meaningful, and you get sworn in at the wall. We don't jump in combat, so honestly, there's a little bit of a misconstruction there, which is that we haven't jumped in combat since 1956. Militaries, believe it or not, helicopters kind of replaced parachuting itself in order of moving behind enemy lines. To be honest with you, helicopters are a little bit more fun. Helicopters, if you're flying in a maneuvering helicopter, it's a little bit like a kind of flying motorcycle.
Okay.
So, but we do jump, and we jump to be prepared, and part of the folklore or the mythology of Israel. So jumping out of the airplane was it was kind of fun for me. It wasn't fun for everyone. I will tell you. Can I tell you the story?
Yeah, I'd love to.
And that is that the first time I jumped, the chute didn't open in time.
No.
And you're supposed to count to 3, and the chute's supposed to open. So I counted. I didn't know because I had jumped for the first time. You counted 1, 2, 3, and it didn't open. And I counted 4, 5, and then it opened. If you count to 9, you're dead. And so I counted to 5. The chute opened, and I hit the ground completely hard. And if you see me when I walk out, I'm limping on my knee.
Oh, my goodness.
Because my knee never recovered.
Oh.
On the other hand, we all got down and everyone said, "Did you see Tel Aviv? Did you see Tel Aviv?" I was like, "I didn't see anything." And then when I jumped the second time, I counted 1, 2, and the chute opened, and I said, "Oh my God, I almost died the first time."
Oh my goodness, that's incredible. Well, I had a friend that was in the 81st Airborne Division here in the States, and I said, "Were you scared when you jumped out of the plane the first time?" I said, "No, I wasn't scared at all." He said, "I was too busy thinking about, am I doing everything right?" Yeah. He said, "The second jump, I was terrified."
That's exactly right. That's the same exact thing. Absolutely true.
Yeah. Well, throughout history, anti-Semitism is an evil and wicked endeavor facing the Jewish people. Jews are under a constant siege of aggression with a growing concern of its horrible behavior in the United States in the recent days. We're seeing more of that surface. What are your thoughts?
So it's really interesting because maybe counterintuitively, the people of Israel are at war. We're at war. We Israelis are at war. We're part of a larger Jewish people. And we kind of understand who our enemy is. We are defending ourselves, even if initially we had a problem with that. And when we look at the greater Jewish world, we're frightened. We're not frightened for ourselves. We're frightened for the rest of the Jewish community, the global Jewish community, the American Jewish community. And any Israeli would say, we're more fearful for the American Jews and the position that they're in than for ourselves.
In 2016, Pew Research says that overwhelmingly Jews in Israel feel a strong sense of belonging to the Jewish people and are proud to be Jewish. Fully 93% of Jews say they are proud of their Jewish identity, and 88% say they feel a strong sense of belonging to the Jewish people. Overall, 22% of Jews say being Jewish is primarily about religion, while more than half, 55%, say being Jewish is essentially about ancestry and culture. Can you explain what it means to possess Jewish identity in the Jewish state of Israel?
So I think that both of those things are right. The Jews are in a unique position in the world. We're the Jewish people. We've always been the Jewish people. We're one of the nations in the world. But we uniquely also have one God. And that's everyone. That's the universal God. It's God. But God, we feel attached to God not just on a personal level and a personal level of faith, but on a national level, our national God. That's part and parcel of our dynamic. So we're both. And we all feel in one way or a sliding scale connected to both. One of the great things to answer you is that a majority of Jews in Israel aren't really very religious. But 90-something% of Israelis think that the reason why we're there is because God gave Abraham the land of Israel.
Yeah, so there's still a religious connection then.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, right.
100%.
Well, news between Iran, Hezbollah, and Israel changes by the hour, as you know. What do you suppose is next for Israel?
So there's two things to say, how we're dealing with it and what is going on. Iran is now, the ball's in Iran's court. They need to make some choices. And the choices they need to make is their proxy in Hamas is kind of devastated right now. They've kind of lost that card. Do they want to lose their Hezbollah card, or do they want to keep that sword sheathed for the moment? And do they want to challenge themselves? After the night of the drones, our response was measured pretty much impressively, where we took out their air defenses. We did not attack the sites. That's a pretty great thing. And we'll quote a Jewish source. In the Mishnah, it says, you know who's strong? Someone who can control themselves. And we showed immense strength that night, and they should be afraid of us, and they are. So on a global level, do they want to escalate and go to a regional war, or do they want to stop and try and fight another day? That's the geopolitics. On the societal level, Israel's an amazing place, and we are not tense. We are not in stress. We are a little bit the Jewish people where bad things happen to us, and we just smile and we go on, and we've always been that way. And the expression in the streets of Israel today is, you know what? We survived Pharaoh. We'll survive this too.
Yeah. So you are a licensed tour guide. Where do you enjoy taking tour groups the most when leading them to the many historical sites in Israel?
So if you can't see me, but I'm laughing, it is truly a tremendously difficult question. I spent 20 years in the desert, and there is phenomenal meaning in the desert. God dwells in the desert. The Jewish people found their consciousness in the desert. Anyone who is a spiritual leader, from Jesus to David to Elijah to Muhammad, finds their spirituality in the desert. So in many ways, the answer is the desert, where this immense spiritual journey that you can have in the desert. But that doesn't negate the fact that what I do for a living is I teach architectural history of Jerusalem, or the subtext is love of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And it doesn't negate the fact that I live in Tel Aviv. So I would say all of those. Oh, yeah, and the Galilee.
I love it. What's involved in becoming a licensed tour guide in Israel? I think it's pretty involved, right?
I love that question. Is that okay that I say that?
Yes.
Believe it or not, it's a 2-year course, which is a master's degree equivalent in something called Knowledge of the Land of Israel. You need to take courses on everything that would be effective of Israel, not only just Bible studies, but sociology, botany, zoology, climate, obviously archaeology, history, just anything that you could imagine. And you take those courses, you have to pass all of them. And it's a 2-year course on a graduate level to understand what's going on in Israel.
Yeah. As you mentioned, you completed a MA in architecture from the University of Pennsylvania and lecture on architecture of Jerusalem at the Hebrew University. Now, over the centuries, many nations and religious groups have left their stamp on many structures that we see today in Jerusalem. Is it true that the municipal laws in Jerusalem require that all the buildings be faced with local Jerusalem stone?
Absolutely. And in fact, it's an interesting construct for an architect, which is that this is the constraint, and that means it's also the opportunity to be phenomenally creative with it. All buildings in Jerusalem have to be faced with Jerusalem stone, so that there's an understanding when you come into the city, whether you're looking at a modern building or an ancient building, that you're in Jerusalem.
Yeah. The city of David, large stone structure standing opposite the Temple Mount, is said to be the remnants of King David's palace. I saw there was an article in 2022, a paper published in the Journal of the Institute of Archaeology of Tel Aviv University, and it said to raise suspicion that David's headquarters were located elsewhere. Do you have any thoughts on that, or have you read that article?
Yeah, I have read the article, and I do have thoughts on it. Look, most, meaning about 80%, and so don't quote me on the real percentage, of the archaeologists globally and in Israel believe that that's David's palace. What they found is David's palace. There is a set of people, a minority set, as you just heard, that are really skeptical of that. That's an archaeological discussion. The truth is that they can date it to the time of King David. So there's this monumental structure that's dated to the time of King David. I can do the math.
Yeah.
And some other people can do the math some other way.
Well, I've been there, and it's incredible. The city of David is incredible.
Absolutely.
Also, the pool of Selom. I know that they've been excavating, and more has been excavated too. Mm-hmm. There was only a space not a whole lot bigger in this room when I was there in 2018 that had been excavated, but now I think they've got permission to do more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you nailed it, and it was about the size of this room. That was what was exposed. It took a long time for them to acquire the property in order to be able to excavate the rest of it. It's not as if they don't know what they're doing or they don't know what it looks like. It's just that they're going to be able to flush it out where the whole pool will be available for you and for me to understand what we're looking at.
Was there a type of cleansing pool at David's time they would go to before they went to the temple?
The answer is yes, but that was closer to the Gihon Spring itself.
Okay.
Where you would see, if you've been, you see the big towers when you go kind of underground.
Right.
And there are the big towers of the Gihon Spring. Yeah. That's where they're talking about.
Oh, okay.
And that's where Solomon was consecrated. Solomon's consecrated with olive oil from the Mount of Olives at the Gihon Spring pool. And that's where you're referring to in terms of King David as well.
I did take the hike through the Hezekiah Tunnel.
So can I say something about that?
Please.
And that is what's amazing about Hezekiah's Tunnel, which I think people don't give the correct perspective on, is by the time they built King Hezekiah built the tunnel, which brought the water source of Jerusalem from outside the city into the city to the Siloam pool. The rest of Judea had fallen to the Assyrians, and of course so had the 10 tribes. Everyone who believed in monotheism in the world was in Jerusalem. If King Hezekiah doesn't build that pool, the tunnel, then we wouldn't be talking to each other today.
Oh, isn't that amazing? That's so amazing. Are there any recent archaeological finds underway that may be of interest to our listeners right now? I mean, they're constantly finding them. Anything hot right now?
So the most important hot things are actually in Jerusalem, where they've excavated underneath the plaza where the Western Wall is, and they're excavating across from Dung Gate in that massive excavation. And they're finding amazing things through many different time periods. They found the lower corridor of Herod, where the shopping street was, underneath where the people are praying in the Western Wall. go. Both of those sites are open right now. They're still being developed and excavated, but both of them are open to the public, and they are both amazing with amazing new things.
I remember our group got to go to the sifting center. Everything that comes off the Temple Mount, it's all collected in buckets and truckloads, and they bring it down to the sifting center, and we were able to sift through, and we found some early century money and other artifacts. Of course, we gave them back to the university, but just the experience was really nice to be able to do that.
It's great to be hands-on and touch that, and you're touching us. You're touching our, all of our collective,
Okay, I'm traveling to Tel Aviv. What is a must-do while in the city? What are the 3 top places to dine in all of Israel?
Okay, must-see in Tel Aviv?
Yeah.
Wow.
Must-do.
Must-do in Tel Aviv? Can it be fun, or does it have to be historical? No, I'm kidding.
Whatever. What do you think it is?
I think it would be great. You walk up Rothschild. Just take a walk up Rothschild from the beginning to the Habima Theater and just look at the culture of Israel. Yeah. Look at the buildings and the culture. Walking up Rothschild is the center of the modernist movement architecture, and it is in fact a UNESCO heritage site because of its importance. Yeah. But just to be able to breathe the air and everything like that. Best restaurants in Israel, I'm going to be honest with you, ask my wife.
There's a restaurant I've been to. Not many tour groups go there because it's kind of difficult to go. Our bus driver was daring. He went there off of Mount Gilboa, like the Herb Garden, I believe it is. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Oh, the food is delicious.
So that's a great place to be. It's just really spectacular in the whole Gilboa mountain range.
Yes.
We haven't talked about being up north, but all of it is really spectacular.
We could spend a lot of time, obviously. As an Israeli, what is your perspective on our U.S. presidential election in November?
So, wow. The answer to that is a little bit that it's complicated, and I'll explain a little bit why. For the most part, Israelis have always been relatively monolithic in terms of their relationship to the American president. We either think that the American president likes us, and so we adore him, or we don't think they like us, and we don't like him. And it doesn't really have to do with their policy. It has to do with the fact, I'll give you an example, that Bill Clinton came to Israel and spoke in Hebrew. Well, we love him. George W. came to Israel and exuded the love of Israel that as a good Christian that he has, and we loved him. And so it wasn't like the two of them had the same policies, and we didn't care. They loved us. We loved them. In the modern time right now, it's more or less polarized like in the United States. In other words, it's not a good answer for you in that the people that lean towards, one direction are going to tell you about how great Trump was. The people that lean in the other direction are going to tell you, number one, how awful he was and how great Harris is. And it really is, as it is in America, really split. So I don't really have a good answer for that.
Yeah. Well, I know one thing in 2018 when I was there, the Jerusalem embassy, the embassy was moved to Jerusalem, and there was a lot of excitement there for that time. And I remember seeing American flags and Israeli flags flying together.
You can see that everywhere in terms of all of it. And in fact, in other words, I think that Israel is uniquely positioned in that we adore the United States of America. We love the United States of America. We look to the United States of America for everything. And I'm not talking about military aid and geopolitics. I mean that we really just think that America is the standard that we would love to live up to. And I'm sure you get that feeling. So those American flags that you saw in the move to the embassy were there for the moment, but they're there all the time. During the beginning of the war, there were these massive American flags on the billboards in Tel Aviv. America stands with us and we stand with them, and just we have a love relationship with the United States.
Abraham Silver, this has been my pleasure to have you come here to Bott Radio Network, Mid-South Viewpoint. You did wonderful. This was a great time to share about Israel. Thank you for your insights and the things you had to share today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I will tell you secretly, I love Memphis.
Oh, that's great. Hey, now, if somebody listening wanted to maybe connect with you in a way, do you have an email address they could write? Can you give an email address?
Is that okay?
Sure it is, yeah.
It's just my name, abrahamsilver@gmail.
Okay. Gmail.com.
Yeah, gmail.com.
Okay. Hey, my pleasure. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, friends, that's all the time we have on this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. Thanks for stopping by. I'm Byron Tyler, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.